Right, thanks for your patience and thanks again for joining. So today what I wanted to do was kind of revisit the topic of artificial intelligence and specifically how it is influencing and shaping the world of apprenticeships and skills more broadly. What I'm going to share with you is a sort of a workshop presentation that I actually delivered at the Apprenticeships conference in Birmingham not so long ago. And we thought we'd follow up by delivering it just to a wider audience. And then obviously you'll have the recording as well. So like I said before, you can share this with your colleagues and your learners and the employer clients that you're working with as well. And really what I wanted to do was share some insights and specifically some tips really. So hopefully you can come away with something tangible from the session, which are based on my experiences of sort of heading up an endpoint assessment organisation and the various interactions that I've had the privilege to have had over the last certainly the last 12 months since I last did a session on this topic. So I've been heavily involved in work with other awarding organisations as part of the Quality Alliance and now a joint EPA group which we're running, which is a combination of endpoint assessment organisations from both the Quality Alliance and the Federation of Awarding Bodies. So we've got a lot of expertise in that group and a lot of experience, and we're very proactive in sharing those insights. I've also been working very closely with training providers and regulators and indeed employers and apprentices as well, to understand how they're using artificial intelligence to enhance and augment the work that they do, but then also how we can be collectively aware of the risks that it presents and what we can do to mitigate them. So my sort of ethos, I guess, with AI is it's here to stay. We ought to embrace it, but I think it's really important that we all work together as one sector to understand how we best embrace it and understand how we mitigate and understand what those risks are. I don't think there's much use in us kind of doing it individually as organisations, because I think that's potentially quite confusing for learners. If they've got a policy on AI from their employer, they've got a policy on AI from their training provider, and then there's another policy on AI from the awarding organisation, I think that that's unnecessarily complicated. So I'm absolutely advocating for a more joined up approach. And I know I recognise a lot of the names on the attendee list of people that I've spoken to on a one-to-one basis who've expressed an interest in being involved in that. So please do kind of reach out and either remind me or express your interest now for the first time. And I'll very much get you into that loop and get you involved, because I want to learn from you and also share with you my own kind of insights and experiences. I will say that I'm not an AI expert, but I think in many ways that makes me quite well positioned to talk about this, because I think I'm in the same bracket as 99% of us of AI, something that is shaping the way that I work and influencing the work that I do. But I'm very much on the learning curve myself as well as everybody else. Okay. A little bit of fun to start off with, and I don't know if there are any telephone kiosk nerds. If there are, please feel free to correct me if any of the information I'm about to share is inaccurate. But I wanted to just share a few images, really, partly as a bit of fun, but also really to set the scene and provide a bit of context about the way I'm going to talk about AI and the influence that it's having and will have. So I think what we can see there is what's known as a Case 6 kiosk. And I'm going to have to refer to my notes on this, which was invented in 1926. And I think everybody's familiar with that image. It's famous the world over on postcards. I mean, you could ask anybody in any country where that's from, and I think a lot of them would be able to answer it. And you fast forward from 1926 to 1985, and we have the marvelous KX range of phone booths. Now, I think most of us would agree that the one on the left is far more aesthetically pleasing, but I would encourage you to think about why the KX range was introduced. And I think it's largely around manageability, cost, scalability, and the drivers that influence kind of businesses and the way that we work. So the newer range of phone boxes were brought in because they were much easier to clean, much easier to maintain. As the population grew and technology evolved, we needed more of these things, and we needed them in kind of various sort of urban and rural locations as well. But I think it's safe to say that we lost something in that transition. We lost something in the aesthetic and the sort of artisan quality of that original phone booth. And if you indulge me and allow me to continue the theme, I'd make the same comparison with something as arbitrary as the street lamp. So I think the Victorian street lamps were things of beauty, whereas they're replaced today with something that's a lot more functional, a lot cheaper to build, can be built at scale, easier to maintain, easier to kind of keep clean and all those sorts of things. If we look at that building, I'm sure a lot of you would recognise it as the rather splendid St Pancras Station, which is now a luxury hotel. If you haven't been there, I'd very much recommend that you give it a go next time you're in London. It's right next to King's Cross Station. It's beautiful. It has a beautiful sort of lobby with a bar. Great place to kind of meet colleagues and friends. Compare that with the Euston Station, which is about a mile or so down the road, and it's I don't know, very functional. So you might say it's slightly brutal. But that's the direction of travel. If we look at the way the world was kind of 100 years ago and the way that it has evolved and the way it is now, I think that a lot of us would agree it's not as pretty, it's not as beautiful, but it's functional and it's business-like. And really, I think the reason I want to hammer this message home, like I say, if you indulge me, is that I think we need to recognise that's the way the world works and that's the way that businesses operate. I think we should think of AI and the way it's going to influence things in those same terms, which is that essentially it's going to allow us to do things much faster and it's going to allow us to be able to deliver things at a much larger scale, but we are going to lose something in that transition. And I think it's important that we understand and accept that. And then only then can we start to think about what is it we're willing to lose? What is it we're willing to sacrifice as we move into this new world of kind of automation and artificial intelligence. And then lastly, to put it really into the context of kind of the modern world and the tech that we use. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, you would ring, say, the government or your broadband supplier, and you'd get put through to a call center and you'd speak to a human being who showed empathy and compassion and really understood you and wanted to help you. And they were trained in these things as well. Fast forward to now, and you have the dreaded chatbot, and I absolutely hate these things. They wind me up. And you can't stand it if I'm trying to speak to somebody and you can't find a phone number on the website anymore. And they'll say, okay, go on to the chat function for help. You go on, it's not even a human being, and you get stuck in that kind of doom loop, if you like. So I think we have to embrace the change. We have to understand that we're probably going to be required to sacrifice certain things, but we also need to think about the kind of customer experience. And in particular, I would refer to apprentices and learners as customers in this context of let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's understand what we're good at as human beings. Let's understand what the machine is good at in terms of artificial intelligence, and then use that to augment what we do rather than replace it. So just to kind of summarize really on what's the reality of the world that we live in the context of artificial intelligence. So it doesn't always improve things. I'm sure most of us now are using AI on an almost daily basis, and it is absolutely brilliant at certain things. But there are a whole host of things that it's not particularly good at, and I think we're going to explore what they are, because better the devil you know it. Markets crave efficiency, so this is kind of that point I was just talking about of businesses tend to be owned either by sort of private equity or shareholders or individuals, or they might be public services that are funded by the taxpayer. Regardless of what that structure looks like, almost all businesses in the modern world are looking at ways of doing things cheaper and doing things at scale and doing things more quickly. And we have this sort of very familiar refrain of doing more with less. And I think we're all increasingly asked to do that. And so AI will help us to do more with less. But along the way, we are possibly going to sacrifice some of those things that are more resource intensive and, putting it bluntly, nice to haves. So it's really important that we understand what are nice to haves and what are things that we genuinely need to retain and maintain in terms of the apprentice experience. The sacrifice is inevitable. There's individual businesses I think we each have to pitch our stall. So, you could go one of two extremes, or you could go in the middle of those. So the two extremes, I would say, one is you might say, okay, let's completely embrace AI and get rid of humans as far as we possibly can, and we'll just do everything by machine, and it'll be a lot more efficient and quicker and cheaper, and we can stack them high and sell them cheap. Or you might think, well, actually, our USP is going to be the human touch, and it is that sort of artisan approach where it's a lot more hands-on. It's a bit more expensive, or it might be a lot more expensive. It might take more time, but actually it's a better experience, and we genuinely believe that that leads to better outcomes for the learners. Or the reality is you might sit somewhere in between those two pools, and I think probably most of us eventually, if not already, will sit somewhere between those two pools. So AI brings threats and it brings opportunities. I think personally, from the work that I've done and the research that I've done, and I've watched a lot of sort of presentations and gone to conferences and so forth, is my view is that the threats are sometimes overblown with AI. Yes, they exist, but the same threats exist in humans carrying out tasks and humans making decisions. I think the opportunities massively outweigh the threats. So I just want to take a little bit of time over the next half an hour or so to look specifically at what some of those threats and opportunities are, but then crucially as well to get your views and people on the call and your own experiences and opinions. And this is a really important point, is that AI is very difficult to detect or prove. And when I'm talking about AI today, what I'm talking about is generative AI and largely the large language models, things like ChatGPT that we're familiar with. And I'm focused on them because they are the prevalent technology, I think, both in the way that we all work and in the way that apprentices work and kind of prepare their evidence for assessment. And there's a big fixation, I think, on, oh, well, students are using AI to write their essays for them. And that is a legitimate concern. But the reality is AI comes in lots of various guises. And so, I mean, you can be typing something into a Word document and it'll be automatically correcting it for you and recommending how to change. That's a form of kind of AI. It's an intervention from the technology that's helping you to finesse the work that you're doing. ChatGPT and so forth are essentially kind of more sophisticated models of the same thing. So I think it's important we accept that in the modern workplace, individuals, employees are being required to, in some cases, use AI to carry out some of the functions within their role. So as educators and as assessors, we need to lean into that and we need to embrace it. And so we shouldn't just have a blanket rule if you don't use AI. We should set really clear guidelines and parameters and principles around the use of AI and then enforce those collectively. And I think one of the other things, the final bullet on here, is that it is difficult to detect and it's even more difficult to prove. So, quite often I might have somebody flag something and say, okay, I think the learners used AI to generate this. You look at it and you can pretty much tell straight away that they almost certainly have. You can just tell from the way it's structured and that it uses the Americanizations of spellings and things like that. But the reality is you can't absolutely prove that that's the case. And there is research that DFE have published where there are kind of false positives and learners have been accused of using AI and have been punished. And then it's been found later down the line that they actually didn't. And I've used one of the detection tools myself, actually, just out of curiosity. And I typed in a response to a knowledge descriptor for a level 6 standard in financial services, I think it was. And I asked the AI what was the likelihood that had been AI generated, and it said it was 100% certain that it was. And of course it wasn't, and I know it wasn't because it's something that I'd written. Now those models are getting more sophisticated, but I think we're fighting a losing battle if our strategy is to find ways of detecting the use of AI and then failing learners as a consequence. I think a much better approach for us is to focus on the design of the assessment itself. So designing assessments in a way that they are reliably testing and validly testing the knowledge, the skills, and the behaviours that we want to see. And actually, it might be that the students used AI to generate some content, but it's what we do to test that content, so to test their underpinning knowledge and understanding of the thing that they've written about. That's the important thing, rather than trying to resist it because you're on a hiding to nothing. So AI lacks core human skills. So it's really brilliant, actually, at kind of summarizing documents, and it's all kind of linked live to the web now as well. So I use it on a daily basis, and it's absolutely excellent for helping to write policies or helping to disseminate information from different sources. It's really, really quick. It can use massive data sets, and it's very, very, very reliable. It's not infallible, but it is very, very reliable in lots of ways. But what it can't do is it can't really think critically. It's not very consistent. Their outputs are kind of random. It just takes all of the information and then gives a random response to it, an informed but nonetheless a random response. And of course, it can't show empathy and it can't show encouragement or passion or any of those things. I think it's really important, particularly for those of you who are kind of skills coaches, tutors, who are working day in, day out with learners and apprentices. Please rest assured that AI isn't going to take your job. I think the best thing you can do is to understand what are you good at that the AI isn't, and really hone in on those and use the AI to augment and support you in some of the more administrative functions of your role. So garbage in, garbage out is a common phrase that's used, and it relies on quality data. So we have prompt engineers and things like that now whose job it is to kind of understand the types of prompts that you need to give an AI in order to get the desired responses. But I think it's really important for each of us working in businesses, be that a training provider or an assessment organisation or indeed one of the employers that we serve, is training our staff and making them aware of how to put quality data into the AI, because the output is only as good as the input. It's often not secure, so I think we're getting better as a sector, as a society, indeed, of understanding the issues around security of AI. So most AI platforms that most of us use are what we call open source. So when you're putting data into that AI model, it's then being used to retrain the model so that it can be more informed when it answers questions subsequently. So certainly in the world of apprenticeships, for example, a lot of our clients might be regulators or banks or investment firms. I don't think they'd be very happy if they knew that I was taking their kind of commercially sensitive information and sticking that into an open large language model because I wanted to know how good the apprentice's response was. Extremely irresponsible, and actually is probably in breach of the contract we've got with those organisations. So think about the security and think about the data residencies, the term that's used in the industry. Where is that data going and what's it being used for and who has access to it? And particularly if it's commercially sensitive data, and even more so if it's commercially sensitive data that doesn't belong to your organisation. So that's really important. We increasingly hear of AI being biased. Human beings are biased, and AI only knows what we've taught it. So everything it outputs is based on the millions and billions of inputs that are put into the internet as searches. And all of those inputs, or the majority of them, will include human biases. Now, what the AI is doing is it's amplifying that and it's saying, okay, take all of that. Well, if it's full of biases, it's going to amplify those biases and it's going to amplify those inaccuracies. So just be aware of that. Be aware of that when you're using it, but be aware of that when you're training kind of apprentices and students how to use AI effectively and responsibly. So in summary, AI is here to stay. That's undoubted. It's not going to just suddenly stop or reverse. But critically, it will not replace us. It will not replace you. So I'd really encourage everybody to think about the human aspects of what you do, and in particular, the contact time that you're having with learners. And what can you do to help your business develop a strategy where it maintains that, because it's really, really important. And actually where we're using AI to help make decisions, it should be helping to inform decisions, but not to make them. There should always be a human in the loop, and that human is you. So it's really important to kind of hold on to that and not despair about this kind of rise of the machine. So I'm just going to pause and see, Abby, if there are any questions in the chat.
Yeah, there's one question. AI lacks the personal voice, lacks local context, and can give vague references.
Yeah.
When who's doing it, and I still have to make more discussions too.
Brilliant point. Yeah, so there's a really good point there in the Q&A around just revisiting that point of what the AI can't do and what it lacks. And I was going to make the point, and you've slightly stolen my thunder, but that's fine. Actually, when I spoke before around the design of the assessment, I think is what we need to focus on rather than catching people out or proving people have used it. And that's exactly one of the tips that I give to the training providers I'm working with. So I think when it comes to apprentices and endpoint assessments, that's quite glacial the way that works, just because it takes ages to design an assessment and it takes ages to design and implement the policy. So absolutely, I think as the new assessment principles are applied and we're designing new standards, we can build all of that stuff in. But from the training provider point of view, absolutely what I would agree with that and advocate for is, for example, if you've got an apprentice who's completed a knowledge workbook that covers all of the knowledge aspects of their apprenticeship program, in a lot of ways, it kind of doesn't matter if they've used AI to help them to do that. What you should be doing is asking them, okay, did you use AI? Why did you use it? Can you show me your original work so that I know that you did kind of do it? You only used AI to supplement your understanding or to present it in a more effective way. But then the professional discussion it's a really easy kind of solution, and I would strongly recommend doing it. So it doesn't have to be a massive professional discussion that covers all of it in a load of detail. Really, that just tests elements of it. And by all means, you can record that professional discussion and submit it as part of the apprentice's portfolio of evidence for their endpoint assessment. So, for example, DSW's endpoint assessor opens the portfolio, they look at the knowledge statements and they have the same instinctive reaction of you of, okay, this looks very much like it's been written by artificial intelligence. However, there's a document in that folder and they open it and it's the skills coach just testing the apprentice's knowledge and not just exploring some aspects about what they've written about. That's going to massively reassure you and that independent assessor that actually, yes, they used AI, but they've explained why and how they used AI, and they can demonstrate that they themselves have that underpinning knowledge that's required to the level of the apprenticeship that they're studying. So that's a really good point. Okay, so I'm going to move into the tips section now. And like I say, I've split this into tips for students, tips for educators, tips for awarding organisations, and also some tips for regulators, because we're speaking, on a regular basis to certainly Ofqual, and also policymakers like the department. But I think compartmentalising them in this way is quite helpful, and there's a lot of crossover between them, as you'd expect. Okay, students, I just made the point before, garbage in, garbage out. So I think don't just assume that your students all know how to use AI effectively. If your organisation kind of doesn't have an AI training module, then I would strongly recommend having one. And then within that module is things like, okay, understanding the prompt engineering and understanding what a good, robust input looks like, and then understanding how you can test the accuracy of that so that actually it isn't generating those false references. And I've seen ChatGPT do that a lot, and that it doesn't have those biases in it. So understand organizational policies, and this comes back to the point I made at the beginning, is actually if you put yourself in the apprentice's seat, they've potentially got 3 lots of policies that they're looking at. So they've got their business's policy on the use of AI, which is obviously critical because that's their job. Then they're going to have the training provider's policy on AI, which says, okay, well, you can't use it to generate your knowledge statements, or you can use it, but you have to do X, Y, and Z. And then you're going to have the awarding organisation's policy on AI. And actually, there's a high risk that there are some discrepancies between those 3 policies. So one might say, absolutely don't do this, and another might say, it's okay under the following circumstances. That's why I think moving into the next 12 months and beyond, I very, very much want you to reach out to me and, help us to build this community so that we're having those common policies and common principles so that we're being consistent and it's fairer and transparent for learners. So seeking training, formal and informal. So a lot of students are going to do their own kind of, looking at YouTube videos and so forth and trying to learn about AI. But I think the formal training is important as well to make sure everybody has a consistent experience, everybody has equal access, and everybody's working towards a common framework. So sharing best practice with students, I think, is really important. So within their kind of peer community, but also with their colleagues at work. And actually, if they can demonstrate that they've done that sort of stuff, there are probably a whole bunch of KSPs in their apprenticeship standard that's going to help them to demonstrate proactive behaviours. Knowing how to test those outputs. So again, I think the training is really important there for them to know what tools and techniques they can use to make sure that what the AI said is accurate. If I use ChatGPT again, there's loads of times where I've put something in kind of knowing the answer and just wanted to check my understanding, and it said something that I know to be incorrect. and then I'll correct it, and I might give it a link to a page, and it'll say, "Oh yes, sorry, you're right," and it does that all the time. So we just need to be really mindful of that. It's kind of a lot of these models are created in a way that it's rather than contradict what you say, it kind of says, "Oh, that's brilliant. I've tweaked it slightly." It's not very critical of your work, so just be aware of that. And I think a really important, straightforward, and foolproof tip for students is if you're not sure, just ask if it's okay. And then at least you can get a very clear steer. And actually, us getting those questions as training providers and assessment organisations helps us to refine and improve our own understanding of how AI is being used, so that we can adapt those policies and processes and principles to make sure that they reflect the way that AI is used in the workplace, because that is changing on a day-by-day basis. You can't just say, here's a policy and we revisit it once a year. I think it's a lot more fluid and dynamic than that. It's really important that students reference any use of AI, and I would say cross all the T's, dot all the I's if I were a student, and if you've used it at all, just be clear about it. And it's the best thing you can do, because actually if the last thing you want is a suspicion that you've used it and tried to hide the fact that you've used it. If you're a student and you're, say, an apprentice, and you're asked to write minutes of a meeting, but your employer says, we absolutely have to use this Read AI plugin on MS Teams, and that's how we do our minutes, then that's when you have the conversation with your skills coach and your training provider. Say, okay, well, I can't write the minutes, or I can, but it's in reality a pointless exercise because we use the AI. Because these standards are published and they sit there for years and years and years, whereas the world of work's evolving all the time, especially when it comes to technology. So I think that communication up and down is really important. So the key thing there is just to reference the use of AI. So demonstrate the appropriate understanding, and you can help them to do that. So, for example, like we just talked about, a short professional discussion that follows each kind of knowledge section, where you're just testing elements of it. You don't have to test the whole thing. The assessor's going to know, okay, they've answered these questions and confidently and quickly, and they've showed that kind of critical analysis. That'll be sufficient. The same is for all of us. Know what the AI is good at, but know what its limitations are. Using it to support your admin, and this is a tip that obviously applies to students, it applies to you guys on the webinar, it applies to me and all of the colleagues that I work with. AI is really, really good at supporting you with your administrative stuff. So there is the facilitation of the meetings and the minutes. It's excellent at drafting emails or checking emails, at helping you to kind of revise and create new policies, all that sort of stuff, very good at. But really important, and especially for students, is don't become reliant on it. And I think we can view this in two ways, the micro and the macro. So I think the micro is that individual apprentice who you're working with and you're supporting. They might be using AI all the time because they like it, or they have to do it as part of their job. But it's just remembering what are the core skills that we need these people to have and to develop. So there's the individuals, so making sure that they're not over-reliant on the AI and that they're developing their communication skills and their behaviours and so forth. But then on the macro level is actually, if you repeat that across tens of thousands of students every year doing apprenticeships, well, actually, if every one of those students becomes reliant on it, as a country, as a society, then our levels of competence in those core kind of skills is going to just dip and decline over time. So we're going to get worse at communicating, we're going to get worse at creating and writing creatively. We're going to get worse at critical evaluation, and that applies to individual students, but us as a society on a whole. So don't resist the AI, but resist reliance on the AI, I think is how I would summarise that. Okay. I'm going to actually take all the questions at the end because I think it'll just be a bit smoother and easier to facilitate that way. So I'm going to move on to the tips for educators. So this is you guys. So I've just made that point again, AI can't do your job. So a couple of reasons for that. One is don't be afraid of it. And the second is just think about how it can improve the way that you work. So learn from your students. So spoiler alert, your students probably know more about AI than you do. And it's a generational thing. I don't think that's too much of a sweeping statement. So learn from them. Don't just kind of dictate to them and ask them and explore how they used AI, what different tools and techniques have they used, what different platforms have they used, and then you can kind of spread that throughout the community of peers that you work with, and we can all kind of learn together. So creating policies and creating FAQs, I think FAQs are really useful as well because, I think a lot of us are more likely to read something short and snappy than a 40-page policy on AI. So exploring the different platforms that are available. I went to an AI summit actually a few weeks ago run by AALP, and it was really interesting and had some excellent speakers there and they had panels on the ethics of AI and things. And one of the core messages that came throughout the day was don't bite off more than you can chew. And actually, if you're relatively new to the world of AI, pick a platform and stick with it and explore it and become familiar and fluent with that one. And then move on to the next one. If you try and adapt 3 or 4 new platforms from scratch, chances are you're not going to learn any of them effectively and you're not going to benefit from them. Don't use AI for the sake of it. Again, that came through and it's a really, really important point. AI is brilliant at doing some things and solving some problems, but don't start with the solution, start with the problem. Think about what's the problem that you want to solve. Can AI play a role in helping me to solve that problem? Don't think of, okay, well, we've just bought this new AI platform. What can it do? That's kind of the wrong way around thinking. So educating, your colleagues and peers on the risks and benefits. Using it to support the admin. So I see a lot of this, particularly with training providers, actually, is where they are embracing the use of AI. They're almost universally saying what it's doing is it's freeing up more of their time to spend with the students. That might manifest itself in terms of senior leadership saying, okay, you can have a bigger kind of cohort size now. And that's what I meant at the beginning around kind of the drivers of business. So I think it's working with your leadership and working with your colleagues to make sure that you understand actually it's really important that we have this much contact time with the learners. And I can use the AI to arrange my diary and I can use my AI to kind of, initially mark stuff and then I'll follow up and make sure I'm doing the human marking thereafter. Creating bespoke learner journeys. So we're getting more sophisticated. I think there are a lot of platforms out there that can help you to do this. Slightly tricky in the world of apprenticeships, I would say, because, well, particularly we're going to make the point in a minute about sort of diagnostic assessments. So, and they're not a new thing, but AI makes them a bit more sophisticated than they've ever been. Which is where you'll have a learner and, okay, you might do an assessment and the AI will say, okay, well, we're not going to test them on this anymore because they're obviously brilliant at it, but they've got a weak spot there. And it kind of creates that bespoke journey for them. Just a word of warning with that is just be mindful of what you've done in your skills scan at the beginning of the program and what you're claiming the funding for. Because actually, if your skills scan said, okay, they need to do this bit and you're claiming funding for that section, but then the AI says, actually, they're competent in it, don't deliver it, you've got a mismatch then between what you're claiming and what you're delivering. It's just something to be aware of. So understanding the core skills to nurture, and I've made this point a few times and I'll continue making it, and it ties in with the over-reliance on the AI, is what is it we're trying to teach these people to be able to do? And some of it are the technical skills relating to the job, but there's a lot of crossover with apprenticeships and there's a reason for that, because we all value the same sort of behaviors, if you like, for want of a better term. So understanding things like emotional intelligence, interacting and communicating with others, critical thinking skills, creativity. As educators, I think it's important that we keep hold of those things and keep sight of them, because they are the things that, if we don't focus on them, they slip away into the ether and they're kind of lost forever. So use it cautiously for assessment and feedback, and the same applies to rewarding organisations. And I'll revisit that theme of the human in the loop. Certainly from a regulatory point of view, we don't get much guidance from the likes of Ofqual, but what they absolutely will say is you can't rely on AI to do something. Always needs to be a human. So if that's quality assurance of an apprentice's work, or the assessment of an apprentice's work, or giving feedback to the apprentice, we would never just allow AI to do that on its own. We would always have a human at the very least sort of checking that and moderating it. Really good for analytics and data-driven insights. So things like Power BI, we're using that as a business more and more. And it's really helping us to be more proactive in, say, our quality assurance processes. So it's a lot more automated now, and it's really good at identifying trends and flagging things. So you're not waiting until something's gone wrong and then saying, okay, it's very much saying, okay, this has happened a couple of times now, it's gone amber, okay, now it's a red. And you can look at it when it's sort of amber and not when it's red. It's a pretty crude example, but that's the type of thing I think that AI is really, really good at doing, because it can monitor those massive data sets in a way that humans are just physiologically incapable of doing. Building your own testing, which we've talked about a couple of times, so PDs, so ways of making sure that the apprentice understands what it is they've been talking about or they've written about. Okay. Conscious of time, I think we've booked in for an hour, so we've got a bit of time left. Tips for employers. So by all means, share these slides, share the recording with your employers, and if there's anything that you think is missing from this, let us know, because I'm keen to learn as well as you. But really, we start with the clear policies and guidelines, and again, mindful of the fact that we need to make sure that they're consistent with the policies and guidelines they're getting from the training provider and assessment organisation. But each employer, I think, needs to make sure that the apprentice has access to those so they understand the limitations, but also the expectations and requirements of using things like AI in their role. So sharing, this isn't done very often at all, I think, but the proactive sharing of those policies with the training provider, who can then pass it on to the awarding organisation, I think is really important, because it just heads off those issues of where you pick it up and think, well, they haven't written any minutes for this meeting. Actually, what it is, it's a printout from an AI. But if you've got a copy of that policy from their employer that says, this is what we do, this is what we ask them to do, it just helps us at the very least to have that conversation of, okay, how can we make this work, rather than just saying, I haven't met the outcome. So in the same vein, I think proactively seeking guidance from providers and awarding organisations. As with all of us, the training and the awareness for staff, I think is really important to make sure it's consistent. The quality of access to AI, so make sure everybody's got the same sort of software and hardware, regardless of their socio-demographics, where they live in the country, for example. Being aware of the risks, so the data security. So I think this is an acute one for employers, and it's one that I think a lot are still not fully aware of the risks here, but particularly when you're inputting things in around commercially sensitive information. So you've got your 3-year plan and you've got to present it to the board, and you think, okay, well, I need to get this down to 2 pages and it's currently 4. Well, I'll just pop it into ChatGPT. Well, you shouldn't do that unless you've got a kind of closed version of that, because what you're doing is you're putting in your company's business plan into an open platform. It's accessible. And don't get me wrong, I don't think there is some malevolent force. You haven't got Elon Musk sitting there stealing your business plan, but the fact is probably not compliant with the expectations and the requirements of your business in terms of data security to do that. So just think about that concept that I said before, of data residency. Where does that information go, and who has access to it, and what do they do with it? So tips for us, awarding organisations. So again, there'll be a lot of crossover here. So setting common policies and guidelines, and I say that because I mean common across awarding organisations. I think we absolutely should differentiate from each other in terms of service, SLAs, price, those sorts of things. But when it comes to things like the use of AI, there should be no difference in which awarding organisation you pick. So we are working proactively to do that. So working closely with all stakeholders, so the apprentices, the employers, the providers, the regulators, other awarding organisations, upholding the privacy and data security. So like I say, we shouldn't be taking an apprentice's work and inputting it into a large language model to help us decide on whether it's a fail, a pass, or a distinction, because it's irresponsible and potentially illegal. Mindful of intellectual property. So in the same vein, if a learner has done a project as part of their work, or indeed if it's just a portfolio of evidence and they've submitted it at a gateway, all of that information is that learner's intellectual property. Okay, if there are case studies that they've written, a thesis, an essay, that's their intellectual property. It isn't ours at DSW's. It isn't any awarding orgs. So in the same way that we shouldn't put it in for privacy reasons, we shouldn't put it in because it's not our data to share with anybody. We can use it for the purposes of quality assurance, but we can't just stick it into an open source LLM. So I think embracing and leading the change. So it would be a mistake for us to rest on our laurels and think, okay, we're going to await some guidance from the government and the regulators, because, again, spoiler alert, it ain't going to come. That's just not the way that government or the regulators work, they expect us to be able to kind of take responsibility for it, and to ensure compliance with regulations. It's very important. And as with all the different stakeholders, we can use it to streamline administration. AI-powered resources for learners. So this is something we're doing more and more of as well, which is, for example, creating a whole host of video resources for learners on individual standards and different assessment methods. And what we've done at JSW is we've invested in a technology where we can create AI avatars of ourselves, just slightly weird at first, but actually what it enables us to do is, back to that concept at the beginning, we can do more with less. And in that, we might sacrifice something because actually it's probably 95% as good as a real person kind of delivering the video. But it's about that sacrifice and that compromise. And actually, if we can develop way more resources, that's better, I think, for apprentices, because they have more there to support them. So I would rather, for example, have 5 very, very good tools to support me than 1 brilliant tool. So again, the analytics and data-driven insights, and I gave an example of how we're using that. And again, as with everybody, always have a human in the loop. So yes, we can, and we do use AI to help us in various ways, but we would never rely on it. And even if the regulator came along and said, actually, it's free for all now and it can all be done by AI, we just simply wouldn't do that because we don't think the technology is anywhere near there yet. It's really important we have the human check in those decisions. And I think this is the last one, is tips for the government and the regulators. And again, this is just based on experience I've got of engaging with these different groups. So I think there's a really big opportunity here to use AI to develop new apprenticeship standards. And absolutely, you'll see there's a big push from government and the Department for Education, and they're introducing new assessment principles. And effectively what they're looking to do is they're looking to make apprenticeships and apprentice assessment quicker, cheaper, and more, just generally more cost effective and leaner. And any of us that have sat on trailblazer groups will recognise the fact that it takes a very, very long time and a lot of investment from individuals and employers to develop these standards and assessment plans. Whereas a practical example of where we could use AI to kind of augment that would be, okay, let's pick an occupation. What AI can do is it can scan in an instant all of the job descriptions, all of the job adverts that are out there on the entirety of the internet for that occupation. And then it can identify what are the common kind of essential skills and what are the desirable ones. And then it can use that to devise a set of KSPs, which are used as a starting point for the trailblazer, which is going to save months and months. So actually you get an employer group around or whoever's involved and they look at it and got a template to look at and it's already halfway there. I think we're missing a trick by not doing that, personally. Government regulators to work with industry bodies. So by that, I mean the bodies that represent kind of individual sectors and industries, so sector skills bodies, if you like, but also representative bodies like, say, the Federation of Awarding Bodies, AELP, Federation of Small Businesses, and so forth, because I think that's a much more efficient way of engaging than trying to kind of consult with thousands and thousands of different organisations. So promoting AI awareness and training, I'd like to see the government be a lot more proactive around this, just to help us in being confident that what we're designing and building is in line with their expectations. I think there's an opportunity there to fund and promote AI innovation. So there is some work that Ofqual does around kind of tech and innovation, but I'd like to see that broadened and more in the public eye, really, so we can see where that money's going and what's being done with it. Setting clear red lines. So I think what the regulators are good at is saying you can kind of do what you want as long as it's compliant with the conditions and that you can demonstrate that it's robust and that will remain compliant. That's the approach that they take. I think what might be helpful is if they said, well, actually, these are the following things that you absolutely mustn't do. And one of them would be something like, you mustn't let AI mock assessments on its own. There has to be a human in the loop. And they kind of do say that, but I would like them to broaden that out and have more kind of red lines, avoid these scenarios, just to help us make sure we're on the right tracks. I think embedding AI skills within new standards. So when we talk about AI and apprenticeships, I think people's mind automatically goes to, okay, a level 6 AI or kind of coding, prompt engineering. Absolutely, I think we need apprenticeships that are in the field of AI, but actually I think a lot of roles now are very hybrid, and we're increasingly at every levels, so every size of business in every sector and every level of individual within that business being expected to use AI. So that might be as a leader to help inform your strategy and your decision making. It might be as an administrator to help you to carry out specific tasks. But we're all being asked to use AI. And in the same way that we might have things like, say, green modules that are embedded within all apprenticeship standards and sustainability and EDI, we should have that same approach, I think, with AI, because it's prevalent now across all sectors and all levels. I think running pilot schemes, and again, making them very open to the public so that, a very clear reporting on what's working well and what isn't. I think an AI and education task force would be really good. So showing a bit of leadership there in terms of not just relying on individuals or individual representative bodies, but actually driving that forward. Designing authentic assessments. So this is, I love this term, authentic assessments. In essence, it's used a lot in HEIs and universities, and it's around the type of assessment we see a lot of in apprenticeships, actually, which is, so it's not based on kind of rote learning. It's more around work-based application and demonstrating understanding through the application of knowledge. So to a large degree, I think that happens with apprenticeships anyway, but I think it can be better. And in the design of apprenticeships moving forward, we need to be thinking about almost take an ethical hacking approach to it to say, okay, well, if I were going to try and cheat and use AI to complete this apprenticeship, what would I do? And then designing it to sort of mitigate those things. So I think beware of the hype with AI. So it's really good and it's evolving every day and it's brilliant at some things, but it isn't the be all and end all. It's not here to replace humans, certainly not in my lifetime. We must learn together. Like I said before, we can all collaborate and come up with policies and, working principles, but actually students and apprentices, they're learning this kind of, they're digital natives, to use a common parlance. We can learn from them as well. So avoid using it arbitrarily. Don't just say, what can I use this AI to do? Think of problem and then think about whether AI can form part of the solution. Never forget those core skills that we're teaching. And remember your value as a practitioner. And think about the experiences you've had with students where you really think that you've made a difference to somebody and you've inspired them. Do you think that a computer or an artificial intelligence could have done that? No, I don't think so. And then finally, I think ride the wave. I think it will be completely futile to try and resist AI. It's here to stay. It's just going to continue to get more and more powerful and more prevalent. And I think we should lean into it and actually figure out how we can leverage the benefits of it rather than just panicking and focusing on the, oh, well, apprentices are going to use it to cheat, learners are going to use it to cheat. Think about how it can improve the way that we work, not resist it. Right. Apologies, that was a lot of me talking. Hopefully we've got some questions in the Q&A section, so give you the opportunity to share your own insights or ask any questions. Thank you. I can now see the Q&A as well, so I'll run through those. Great. Yeah, so Jim, a few people saying interested in being involved in streamlining the policies between the stakeholders. So I'll take that forward. I mentioned earlier, I'm very heavily involved in the EPA or Quality Alliance, which we're currently kind of running a 6-month proof of concept pilot of joining forces with the Federation of Awarding Bodies. So collectively, we've got about 200 endpoint assessment organisations now. And I know that FAB are working on a kind of separate AI work stream. And as part of that, I'm very much encouraging them to collaborate with the wider sector. So yeah, we'll take that forward. Please just, if you pop it in the Q&A if you've got an interest, and also when we email you the slides, if you just respond and say you're interested, and I'll make sure we definitely capture your details. My colleague Abby has very helpfully put a chat. She's given me the chat link survey, so I'm going to pop that in as well. So if you wouldn't mind just responding to that before you log off, that'd be really helpful, just to give you feedback on the session today. Okay, so Linda said, on behalf of Wolverhampton College, I declare that the work submitted for assessment has been carried out without assistance other than that which is acceptable according to the rules of the specification. Yeah, this is great. So this is a declaration that Linda shared that they use. I certify the best of my knowledge the evidence submitted for the assignment is the learner's own. The learner clearly referenced any sources and any AI tools used in the work. I have not solely used AI to mark learner's work. I understand false declaration is a form of malpractice. Perfect, Linda. And I think from what I've seen, that's largely the way that most of our AI policies work. So I think the collaboration is just making sure that that is the case. There aren't any discrepancies and that we kind of those common principles, if you like. And Rachel says, raise the bar interest in getting involved. That's brilliant, Rachel. Thank you. We don't have any other questions in the chat. So if there are any final questions, please pop them in there. If any questions pop into your head subsequently, obviously, please just get in touch and I'll be more than happy to have a chat with you and answer them. And, even if you just wanted to have a broader chat around AI, always let me know. Okay, so thanks for your time, everybody, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. Take care.